2 days. Just 2 damn days. That's all it took. Oh. Right, in this video we're going to be going over, assuming that, we're just looking at ARs as well by the way, assuming that all the AR changes in the PTS go through to live game, nothing changes, what are the new top tier ARs? And the reason I'm doing this is because yet again there are people going, oh the G36, no. Oh the FAL, no. So we're just going to go over this. I've tested loads of builds. There's like a 1% difference between a variety of different builds. Like on one build, the gap between weapon X and weapon Y would be like 2%. On another build, it's 1%, but they don't swap. Now, generally speaking, this isn't really a big issue. However, when we actually add in all of the changes of the weapons that are made and just work things out from base value, we get this. This is put in order of burst DPS. Eagle Bearer, Bighorn, F2000, Foamath, G36, FAL, P416, bloody blah. Some of you might notice that our favourite plaything, St. Elmo's, is like halfway down the list. How is this so? Like I said, we're just working it from base values. So those amazing mod attachments that make St. Elmo's aren't taken into account. This one is in order of sustained DPS. Eagle Bearer, St. Elmo's, F2000, Bighorn, MK16, ACR, TKB, FAL, blood. You get the picture, right? Although this isn't 100% accurate, because like I said, there are weapons like St. Elmo's that have 20% crit chance and 20% critical hit damage mods, it does give us a rough idea. So when you look at this, if you exercise a little bit of common sense, you should be able to like realize that this is going to be a good idea of what are going to be the top ARs, but obviously we then have to figure around with a few things just to put them into builds and then see how they perform. A good example of this again is our lovely old tried and tested St. Elmo's. Although it's like halfway down the list for burst DPS, when we actually factor in those crit chance and crit damage mods on a full build, it ends up being quite a bit higher. So this is the build I'm using for testing. Coyotes, Cheska, Obliterate, 4P Strikers. Sorry to tell those people that are wanting to get away from it, this build is still the meta. Now, all builds will be calculated at 54% because that's with the mod variations, etc. Basically, the main number that kept on coming up, 54%, minus St. Elmo's, which goes to 64%. However, with a mod change on the gear, we can get it to 58%. So these are all like natural values. These are all values you can get into the game. The main reason I'm going for 54% is because F2000, that's basically the highest it was able to get. So the next mod attachment on something like the FAL or FAMAS would be crit damage. Essentially, the sight and the muzzle are critical hit chance mods. And then the next one, the underbarrel, which F2000 doesn't, I've put to crit damage. So everything is rolled to basically have the exact same critical hit chance, 54%. Even Eagle Bearer comes up with 54%, weirdly. I thought it had more than that, but I must be just getting old. But the critical hit damage values will be changing, such as obviously F2000 has 5% less. I will also be redoing it again just to show you what happens when we actually put those weapons to essentially 59% crit chance, changing that 5% crit damage to 5% crit chance. I am also not factoring in any damage talents, none at all. So here are those builds on a spreadsheet. FAMAS, FAL and G36 should all be the same. The only difference is going to be fire rate and the base weapon damage value. F2000 should basically be the same. It's going to be 5% lower in critical hit damage. And then the only two outliers really are going to be EB and Elmo. These are all the top contenders for the highest burst DPS within the AR spectrum, minus Bighorn, which I just don't like personally. So, This is their DPS. Now, just in case you can't be bothered reading a bunch of numbers, other than EB and Elmo, the highest burst DPS is F2000. By like 0.65%, there's not a lot in it, but it is literally F2000, FAMAS, G36, FAL. Now what we're going to do, because all of our weapons were set up like this, for 2 crit chance mods, 1 critical hit damage mod plus 20 rounds, we're going to swap that critical hit damage mod to a critical hit chance mod, which basically gives the G36, the FAL and the Foamath 59% crit chance, but we lose 5% critical hit damage, which hopefully you can see on this list here. Critical hit damage 154, whereas EB is 167 and Elmo is 186. So if we then look at this DPS, well, sorry to burst people's bubbles, but as you can see, F2000 is still doing more than the G36, as well as the FAL, that pesky fire rate. Admittedly, it's not by much. There's now a 0.2% difference between the G36 and the F2000, but with the FAL, we're still looking at like over a 1% difference. So yeah, the FAL is nowhere near being a top contender for DPS, especially considering it's still like 2.5% behind the Foamath. Yeah. Sorry, FAL fans. You can still like it, you can still use it. I'm not saying don't use it. Go nuts, by all means. But it's still not a top tier contender for DPS on an AR. So yes, I am sorry to inform people that your top tier ARs are now going to be Eagle Bearer, St. Elmo's, Foamath and F2000. As for the overall difference between F2000 and Foamath, it is mostly going to depend on a build. If it's a build where you're easily able to make up 60% crit chance without compromising much, if anything, i.e. a high-end build of a Cheska piece thrown in somewhere, F2000 will beat Foamath. But on something like a Strikers build, it's one of the reasons why I went with Strikers as well, because it actually handicaps F2000. Because of where I've gone with a Strikers build and there's no crit chance on it or that many rolls, so Strikers is generally quite crit starved. This is why Eagle Bearer fits into it quite nicely, as well as Elmo's because of the mod attachments, but F2000 doesn't. And F2000 on these builds is still outperforming what others are calling top tier ARs, which just means that the F2000 is even more top tier because it is admittedly not by a lot, but it is still outperforming them. And in terms of sustained, it is also outperforming them, which I can show in just a minute, just because considering the only changes that the other weapons got was like FAL, 5% weapon damage. Congratulations. And the G36 got plus 50 RPM. In terms of overall performance, it is still lacking behind the F2000. So if we then actually look at some good old fashioned sustained DPS using the builds that I have already been utilizing and showing, we get this just with Foamath, F2000, EB and Elmo's comparing the sustained. Now granted, when we look at F2000 versus Elmo, it's not that impressive, but we're still doing like 7.5% more in terms of sustained DPS than Foamath. And there is also one thing that I'd just like to quickly remind you of. Again, this is all of the ARs in sustained DPS order, not taking into account talents or attachments. But as you can hopefully see, F2000 is third. FAL is like quite far down the list. So no, FAL, G36, although they're going to be up there and they certainly are better than they were, they're not really top tier contenders for the DPS crown, simply just because of the gap between Foamath, F2000, Eagle Bearer and Elmo's is now just so large that, yeah, all this balancing has done is just bring F2000 and Eagle Bearer into that special little grouping of the meta ARs. That's literally it. If anything, it's caused more problems, which I'm already seeing, hence the need for this damn video. So now if we just factor in a weapon talent, which hopefully you can see here, the critical hit damage on both Foamath and F2000 have gone up a little bit. There is still that 5% difference between them because, you know, missing mod attachment, but already we should hopefully see that adding something like Strained in is going to close the gap. And oh well, would you look at that? Yeah, now please explain to me how F2000 is not a top tier weapon with these changes. Again though, we do not know if these changes are staying, but as it is right now, yeah, you're 4 ARs. Elmo, EB, F2000, Famas. That's it. Have fun, good luck, don't die. It's bad for the health.